On October 16, 2025, Japan's largest gold retailer, Tanaka Japan, made an announcement that sent shockwaves through financial markets. It had run out of gold. For the first time in its history, the company suspended sales of small gold bars, 5 to 50 grams, after demand emptied its vaults. Across Tokyo, investors lined up outside bullion stores. In London and Zurich, traders whispered about global shortage. Within hours, the price of gold broke every chart, crossing $4,300 an ounce, a number that once belonged to fiction. The world wasn't just buying jewelry or hedging inflation, it was escaping from paper money, from trust, from the system itself. The headline spoke of a gold frenzy, but beneath the glitter, something far more serious was happening. A quiet rebellion against money itself. From Tokyo to Frankfurt, from Riyadh to Beijing, nations were no longer trading in trust, they were buying protection. For decades, the global economy rested on invisible agreements that banks were safe, reserves were respected, and that no country would ever touch another nation's central bank funds. That foundation is now cracking. The moment Europe began discussing the seizure of Russia's frozen reserves, the world understood that no asset was untouchable anymore. Behind the soaring charts lies a deeper power struggle, one that began not in the minds of Africa or the markets of Asia, but in Europe's vaults, a struggle over frozen Russian assets, Western debt, and the right to decide whose money is truly safe. This is not a story about gold. This is a story about trust and how the collapse of that trust could redraw the global financial map. So, the central questions now are, why are nations abandoning the dollar and the euros? And how far can this race toward gold go before the world runs out of faith altogether? I am your host, and this is the Interrunner Plus. We have come to realize that 99% of our viewers aren't subscribing. Please subscribe to the channel if you are new here. It is the free thing you can do to support us making this type of content. The world's hunger for gold didn't start in jewelry shops. It began in war rooms and vaults. What's unfolding today is the financial aftershock of a political weapon first used in 2022. When the United States and its allies froze over $300 billion of the Russian central bank's reserves after the invasion of Ukraine. It was a moment that changed the definition of ownership itself. Never before had major powers locked away another nation's reserves, the lifeblood of its financial sovereignty. And most of that money wasn't in America. It was in Europe. At the start of 2022, Russia's reserves looked like this. Only $5 billion was held inside the United States. The rest sat largely in Belgium, at Euroclear, the world's biggest securities clearing house, which alone controlled 191 billion euros of Russian assets. For nearly 2 years, these funds were frozen, not seized. But when Donald Trump returned to the White House in November 2024, Europe's financial dilemma turned into a crisis. On July 14, 2025, during a meeting with NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, Trump declared, "We spent $350 billion on the war between Russia and Ukraine, but this war is not mine and does not concern me. From now on, America will not pay anything. The Europeans will buy weapons from us and send them to Ukraine themselves. We are not paying anymore." Rutte responded with a smile. The Europeans are 100% paying for that. Trump's stance was not surprising to European leaders. According to a European defense official quoted by the New York Times, European governments had already drawn up a plan to purchase American weapons for Ukraine if Trump won the 2024 election. They knew they had no luxury of abandoning Kyiv. The statement was more than rhetoric. It redrew the funding map of the war. Europe had already provided $180 billion in aid since 2022, draining budgets and testing public patience. With Washington stepping back, The question became unavoidable. Where would the money come from now? The answer lay in those frozen Russian reserves. In October 2024, G7 leaders approved the Extraordinary Revenue Acceleration Plan, ERA, a $50 billion loan program for Ukraine, backed by the future profits of the frozen funds. The Biden administration disbursed $20 billion before leaving office, while European institutions released their last €4 billion installment in October 2025. Still, it wasn't enough, as Ukraine's defense ministry warned it would need $60 billion more in 2026 just to sustain its army. That same week, EU leaders met in Denmark, where European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen unveiled a bolder move: a $140 billion reparation loan for Ukraine, guaranteed directly by the Russian assets held at Euroclear. Ukraine would repay the loan, and here is the key word, only if Russia ever pays reparations, meaning the funds would in practice be seized. This was Europe's way of confiscating Russia's reserves to fund Ukraine. This maneuver, a legal disguise for seizure, split Europe. The European Central Bank, led by Christine Lagarde, warned that confiscating another nation's reserves would destroy confidence in the euro as a safe haven currency. In a confidential note later reported by European outlets, the ECB cautioned that central banks would begin converting their euro holdings into gold or other currencies to avoid the same fate. But political leaders pressed on. The public opinion inside Germany had shifted sharply recently. Voters were growing hostile to the endless stream of aid to Kiev, and the government could no longer justify larger new commitments. In September 2025, German Chancellor Friedrich Scholz signaled a reversal of Berlin's earlier opposition. In an article published in the Financial Times on September 25, he endorsed the seizure plan, insisting only that the proceeds be used strictly for Ukraine's defense. One major obstacle remained: Belgium, home of Euroclear. Prime Minister Bart Wever called the EU proposal a great gamble. There is no such thing as free money, he said. If we take Putin's money and spend it, we're all collectively responsible. To Moscow, the message was clear. Putin called the plan theft, and Dmitry Medvedev, deputy chairman of Russia's Security Council, warned that Russia would pursue what he called the European degenerates from Brussels by all possible means, even outside the courts. The ripple spread far beyond Europe. Central banks in Asia, the Middle East, and Latin America began to quietly review where their own reserves were stored. The decision to freeze assets was surprising. The decision to seize revenues was shocking. The plan to seize the assets themselves is, without exaggerating, terrifying to global central banks. If the assets of a G20 nation could be confiscated, whose funds were truly safe? That question triggered a global reallocation, away from Western paper and towards something physical, ancient, and immune to sanctions: gold. The latest available data point to August. 7 central banks publicly reported increases of a ton or more. Kazakhstan bought 8 tons, a 6th straight month of additions. Bulgaria bought 2 tons, its largest monthly buy since June 1997. Türkiye bought 2 tons. Uzbekistan bought 2 tons. Czech Republic 2 tons. Ghana 2 tons. Indonesia 2 tons. China bought 2 tons, lifting reported reserves for the 10th consecutive months to over 2,300 tons. These are the declared purchases. This surge is not a blip. For 3 years in a row, net central bank gold buying has exceeded 1,000 tons annually, an historic accumulation wave that rewrites reserve policy across continents. Analyst Ross Norman put it plainly to Reuters. The effect is the same. Russia has been denied access to its own money. Central banks around the world know this and they are acting accordingly, and that is acquiring more gold. The logic is cold and simple. If reserves parked in Belgium can be claimed, if returns can be diverted, then custody itself becomes a risk. So the shift isn't only into gold, it's also where that gold sits. Vaults in the US and Europe look less neutral. More bars are being kept at home. On the retail front, the signal reached the streets. Tanaka Japan had already suspended sales of 5 to 50 gram bars after running out, a visible symptom of the same fear gripping central banks. Trust is thinning at every level of the system. Meanwhile, Europe's need for cash only grows. Ukraine requires about $60 billion next year for defense alone. That funding pressure keeps Brussels on the path toward asset confiscation. Even as Belgium warns of liability and Moscow threatens consequences by all possible means. The result is a feedback loop. Talk of seizure, gold buying, shrinking faith in Western custody, more gold buying. Markets can price risk. They cannot price broken rules. And as the tonnage climbs, one reality hardens. This isn't about yield. It's about safety and about who gets to define it. And this leads me to the question of the episode. Could Europe's decision to seize Russian assets mark the moment the world finally breaks free from Western financial dominance? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. This is the Interrunner Plus. Please like this video and subscribe to the channel. It costs nothing but helps us a lot.